The blue glow stopped me cold at the top of the stairs. It was 2 a.m. I know because I checked my phone twice, thinking maybe I was still dreaming. But no. The basement door stood open for the first time in 3 years, and something down there was casting that unmistakable flicker of a television against the concrete walls. My feet were bare. The hardwood was cold. Victoria was supposed to be asleep upstairs, but when I'd reached for her in bed 5 minutes ago, her side had been empty and the sheets had been cold. I'd come home a day early. My flight from Denver got moved up and I'd figured I'd surprise her. Walked in at 2 a.m. expecting to slip into bed beside my wife of 9 years. Surprise. I descended the stairs slowly, one hand on the railing, phone flashlight cutting through the darkness. Each step felt like walking into someone else's life, which, as it turned out, was exactly what I was doing. The old coal room was supposed to be back there. Victoria had told me so when we moved in 6 years ago, after she inherited this 1920s craftsman from her grandmother. "The basement is structurally unsafe," she'd said. "Grandma stored old chemicals down there, maybe asbestos. We should just keep it locked up until we can afford to have it properly remediated." Made sense at the time. We were both working long hours, me at the shipping company, her doing medical billing from home. Who had time to worry about a basement? So I'd never questioned the padlock, never asked for a key, never wondered why my wife insisted on being the sole keeper of one door in our home. What I found at the bottom rewired my brain. A fully furnished room, maybe 400 square feet, tucked behind where the old coal storage used to be. Someone had put up drywall, laid carpet, even installed recessed lighting. A bed with rumpled sheets, blue flannel, masculine, a mini fridge humming quietly, and when I opened it, I found fresh groceries, milk dated 3 days ago, eggs, deli meat, a 6-pack of some craft beer I'd never seen in our house. Men's clothes in a small portable closet, size medium, all of it. Darker colors than I wear. Button-downs and jeans and work boots. A phone charger plugged into a power strip. A small television mounted on the wall, still warm to the touch. A coffee mug sitting on a small table, and when I touched it, it was still warm too. Someone lived here. Someone had been living in my basement. And they had just left. Maybe through that window well I noticed in the corner, the one that was bigger than I remembered. Big enough for a person to squeeze through if they were motivated. The screen was pushed aside. Cold air drifted in. My heart should have been pounding. My hands should have been shaking. But 8 years in Army logistics taught me something about crisis response. Panic is a luxury for people who can afford to be stupid. I couldn't afford that. So instead of storming upstairs and waking Victoria with accusations, I did something smarter. I pulled up my phone and started taking pictures. Every angle, every detail, time-stamped, geolocated, backed up automatically to the cloud. The warm coffee mug, the rumpled sheets, the men's deodorant on the shelf, Old Spice, a scent I've never worn in my life, the mini fridge full of food I hadn't bought, the clothes that weren't mine. I photographed it all. 37 images by the time I was done. Then I climbed back up those stairs, closed the basement door, and noticed for the first time that the padlock was sitting on the floor, unlatched. The padlock that Victoria had insisted we needed because of structural problems and old chemicals from Grandma's time. Victoria kept the only key. She'd told me that when we moved in 6 years ago. I'd never questioned it. I was too busy with work, too trusting, too stupid. I put the padlock back on the hasp but didn't click it shut. Then I went back to bed, curled up on my side, and waited. 20 minutes later, Victoria slipped back into the bedroom. I heard her pause, probably checking to see if I was asleep, before sliding under the covers. She smelled like cigarette smoke, which was strange because Victoria didn't smoke. I kept my breathing steady and my eyes closed. "You okay?" she whispered. I made a sleepy noise, mumbled something about a dream. "Okay." She settled in, her back to me. "Love you." I didn't answer. Within 10 minutes, her breathing had evened out. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I played my part perfectly. I arrived at 8 a.m., making noise with my suitcase at the front door, calling out, "Babe, I'm home early." Victoria came downstairs in her robe, coffee in hand, and her smile looked almost genuine. "You're kidding. I thought your flight wasn't until tonight." "Got moved up. Last-minute change. You know how it is." I kissed her cheek. "Figured I'd surprise you." "Well, you did." She hugged me, and I let her, even though touching her felt like handling something contaminated. I was just about to start on some work. How was Denver? Same old. Lots of spreadsheets, bad coffee, worse hotel pillows. You know how those conferences are. Death by PowerPoint. She laughed. The sound used to make me feel warm. Now it just made me wonder how many lies that laugh had covered over the years. "You hungry? I can make breakfast." "That'd be great. Let me just grab a shower first, wash the airplane off." I went upstairs and stood under water hot enough to hurt, trying to organize my thoughts. The man I used to be, the one who existed before 2:47 this morning, would have confronted her immediately, would have demanded answers, raised his voice, maybe even cried. That man was gone. What remained was something colder. Something that remembered watching my father crumble when my mother left him for someone else. He'd confronted her the moment he found out, all emotion and no strategy. She'd cleaned out their accounts and disappeared to Florida before he could even hire a lawyer. I'd sworn I would never be that man. I spent that first day watching Victoria. Not obviously, just paying attention the way I should have been paying attention all along. The way her eyes flicked toward the basement door when she thought I wasn't looking. The way her phone was always face down now, always on silent. The way she asked specifically about my upcoming work schedule. "So when's your next trip?" 2 weeks, Seattle, just overnight." "And after that?" "Portland in March. That's the big one, 4 or 5 days." She nodded, and I could practically see her filing the information away. "It's good that you're traveling again. Shows the company values you." Information gathering. That's what she was doing. Two could play that game. Over the next 72 hours, I became someone I didn't know I could be. The first thing I did was drive to an electronics store 2 towns over. I told Victoria I was grabbing some things for work and paid cash for a small wireless camera. The kind designed for home security, motion-activated, decent resolution, Wi-Fi enabled. I installed it in my home office, angled to capture the basement door through the partially open door. Victoria never went into my office. She said spreadsheets gave her anxiety. The second thing I did was buy a GPS tracker, a small magnetic one that I attached to the underside of her Subaru late one night while she was asleep. I'd checked the Washington state laws first. Legal for marital property, as long as I was on the title. I wasn't going to make any mistakes that could bite me later. The third thing I did was pull our financial records. Bank statements going back 3 years, credit card statements, tax returns. I sat in a coffee shop across town and went through them line by line. Nothing jumped out at first. Our joint account looked normal. But when I dug into Victoria's individual spending, I noticed a pattern. Regular ATM withdrawals of $300 to $500, 2 or 3 times a month. Always in cash. Always unexplained. I did the math. Over 3 years, that was roughly $54,000 in cash that had gone somewhere. The fourth thing I did was call Derek Palmer. Derek and I served together in the 7th Infantry Division, back when we were both young and dumb and thought we'd be soldiers forever. He got out 2 years before me, moved to Seattle, and became a private investigator. We grabbed beers whenever I was in the city, which wasn't often enough. "Shane Whitfield," he said when he picked up. "Either you're dying or you're in trouble. Which is it?" Neither yet. I was sitting in my car in a grocery store parking lot, windows up, engine running. "I need to hire you, officially." A pause. The kind of pause that told me Derek already knew something was wrong. "What's going on?" I told him. All of it. The basement, the room, the warm coffee, Victoria's midnight disappearance, the cash withdrawals. I heard him breathing slowly on the other end, the way he used to breathe before a mission briefing. "You sure about this?" he asked when I finished. "Sure you want to go down this road? Because once you start, there's no undoing it." "Someone's living in my house, Derek. Some man has been living under my feet, eating food my wife buys him while I'm at work paying the mortgage." "Yeah, I'm sure." "All right." Another breath. "Send me everything you've got on her. Full name, maiden name, DOB, previous addresses, employment history. I'll see what shakes loose." "How much is this going to cost me?" "For you." "Buddy rate." "Don't worry about it yet. Let me do some digging first, and then we'll talk numbers." I sent him the information that night, sitting in my car again because I didn't trust the house anymore. Then I went home and had dinner with my wife and pretended everything was normal. Victoria was different, though. Sweeter, more affectionate. She touched my arm during dinner, laughed at my jokes, suggested we watch a movie together like we used to. "You okay?" I asked, testing. "What do you mean?" "You just seem, I don't know, happy." She smiled at me, and there was something behind it I couldn't read. "I am happy. You're home. Why wouldn't I be happy?" Part of me wanted to believe it was genuine, that whatever I'd seen had some innocent explanation, that my wife of 9 years wasn't actually hiding a man in our basement. But I knew guilt when I saw it. And this was guilt dressed up as affection, trying to convince itself it could be something else. 3 days later, I reviewed the camera footage. My home office computer showed me everything in crisp, damning detail. Day 1. At 11:23 a.m., Victoria appeared in frame carrying a tray, sandwiches on a plate, a bottle of water, what looked like a newspaper tucked under her arm. She unlocked the basement door with a key from her pocket, a key I'd never seen, and descended. I watched the timestamp tick by. 30 minutes. 40. 47 minutes before she emerged, empty-handed, and relocked the door behind her. Day 2, 11:15 a.m. A tray with lunch, a book, some kind of thriller from the cover, and a small bag that might have been laundry. This time she was down there for 53 minutes. Day 3, 10:50 a.m. with 2 mugs of coffee. She stayed for an hour and 12 minutes. I watched these clips on a loop, feeling something cold settle into my chest. This wasn't a one-time thing. This was a routine, a system, a second life running parallel to the one she shared with me, operating on a schedule as predictable as my work trips. I called Derek. "I need you to dig deeper," I said. "Her past, before me, everything you can find." "Already on it." His voice had that edge it got when he was onto something. "Tell me something, Shane." She ever mentioned being engaged before? No. She said her early 20s were boring, no serious relationships. Right. Well, her early 20s included a 2-year engagement to a guy named Ethan Gallagher. Ring any bells? It didn't. What happened to him? That's where it gets interesting. Engagement ended about 12 years back. She told you he moved away, right? She never mentioned him at all. Because the truth doesn't fit the story she's been selling you. Ethan Gallagher was arrested 10 years ago for aggravated assault. Bad one. Victim ended up with permanent brain damage. Ethan got 7 years in the state pen, got out 3 years ago. The timeline hit me like a truck. 3 years ago. That's when Victoria inherited this house from her grandmother. That's when she started insisting the basement was unsafe, when she put that padlock on the door. Derek, I said slowly, are you telling me? I'm telling you that Ethan Gallagher didn't move away. He went to prison. And when he got out, I think he moved into your basement. I sat in my parked car for a long time after that call, watching rain streak down the windshield. My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. I just felt hollow, like someone had scooped out my insides and left the shell behind. 9 years of marriage. 9 years of shared meals, shared beds, shared holidays with her family. The family she said wasn't close, who had their own issues. 9 years of believing I knew the woman sleeping next to me. And the whole time, she'd been waiting for him. Week 2. I needed visual confirmation. I stayed home sick on a Wednesday, called my boss, faked a stomach bug, told Victoria I was going to try to sleep it off. At 9:30, I slipped out the back door while she was in the shower, walked 3 blocks to where I'd parked my truck the night before, and drove to the far end of our neighbor's property. The Hendersons were snowbirds in Arizona until April. Their back fence shared a property line with ours, and from behind their garden shed, I had a clear view of my backyard and the basement window well. I'd brought binoculars and a camera with a telephoto lens. I felt ridiculous, like some character in a spy movie, but ridiculous beat ignorant. At 10:15 a.m., a man emerged from the basement window well. He was lean, late 30s, with the kind of wiry build you get from not eating enough or exercising too much in confined spaces. Brown hair cropped short. Nervous energy in every movement, head on a swivel, scanning the yard like he expected trouble. He lit a cigarette and smoked it fast, hunched against the cold. Ethan Gallagher. Had to be. My back door opened and Victoria stepped out. She was wearing jeans and that green sweater I'd bought her for Christmas 2 years ago. She walked across the patio to where he stood, and her body language shifted. Softer, more open than I'd seen it in months. She handed him something. Cash. I could see the bills through the binoculars, a small stack of 20s. They talked. I was too far away to make out words, but I could read body language just fine. The way she touched his arm, the way he leaned toward her. The intimacy of 2 people who knew each other's bodies as well as their own. Then she kissed him. Not a peck. A real kiss, the kind that says, "I've missed you," and "I'll see you soon," all at once. He grabbed her waist and pulled her close, and I watched through my binoculars as my wife melted into another man's arms in our backyard. My backyard. The yard I mowed every other weekend. The yard where we'd had barbecues with friends, where we'd talked about maybe putting in a fire pit someday. I took photographs, 36 of them, time-stamped, crystal clear. When they finally broke apart, Victoria said something that made him laugh. Then she went back inside, and he finished his cigarette, flicked the butt into my yard, and climbed back through the window well into his underground apartment. I walked back to my truck and drove to Seattle. Rachel Torres Esquire had an office on the 23rd floor of a downtown high-rise, and she didn't waste time on small talk. Her handshake was firm, her suit was expensive, and she gestured me into a chair across from her desk like she had 3 other clients waiting. "Mr. Whitfield, Derek Palmer speaks highly of you. Walk me through it, from the beginning." I did. The basement, the room, the surveillance, the photographs. I pulled them up on my phone and slid it across the desk. She examined each one carefully, her expression neutral. "Washington is a no-fault state," she said when I finished. "That means infidelity doesn't factor into the grounds for divorce. However," she held up a finger, "it absolutely factors into asset division, spousal support considerations, and most importantly, credibility. If your wife is planning to drain assets and flee..." I found something else. I pulled up another photograph. The real estate brochure I discovered in Victoria's nightstand. A property in Costa Rica, beachfront, 3 bedrooms. 2 names on the prospective purchase paperwork. Victoria Brooks, her maiden name, and Ethan Gallagher. Rachel's eyebrows rose. "That's not good for her." "It gets worse." I showed her my financial analysis. She told me she makes $48,000 a year. Said her company had tight budgets, couldn't afford raises. I did some digging, had a buddy in HR pull her salary data. She actually makes $72,000. The difference has been going into a separate account I didn't know existed. That's material misrepresentation, not fraud in the criminal sense, but extremely relevant to how a court will view her credibility. Rachel leaned back in her leather chair. "Mr. Whitfield, you've done exceptional work here. Most clients come to me with suspicions and hurt feelings. You've come with evidence and documentation. I spent 8 years planning military operations. You learn to gather intel before you engage." She smiled thinly. "Keep gathering. Document everything. Confront nothing. When we're ready to move, we'll move fast." "How fast?" "Emergency asset freeze, based on evidence of planned flight. Divorce filing that same day. We hit her with everything at once, and she won't have time to adapt." Rachel made a note on her legal pad. "How soon can you have a comprehensive evidence package ready?" "Give me 6 weeks. I want to make sure I haven't missed anything." "6 weeks. Call me when you're ready." I stood to leave, then paused at the door. "There's one more thing. Ethan Gallagher, the man in my basement. He went to prison for aggravated assault. 7 years. Do you know who he assaulted?" Rachel shook her head. "Victoria's brother, Tyler Brooks. Beat him so bad he suffered permanent brain damage. He's been in assisted living ever since." The attorney's professional composure cracked, just for a second. "She's been hiding the man who destroyed her own brother?" "For 3 years. Under my roof. In my house. Good Lord. Yeah." I buttoned my jacket. "That's what I said." The next 4 weeks were an exercise in controlled fury. Every day I went to work and did my job. Every evening I came home and played the part of the oblivious husband. I ate dinner with Victoria, watched TV with her, slept in the same bed, though I'd started claiming back pain, using it as an excuse to turn away from her at night. She didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she was just relieved. Meanwhile, I built my case. Derek dug up everything there was to find on Ethan Gallagher. The assault charge, the trial, the 7-year sentence, the parole conditions when he was released. He was supposed to register his address, maintain employment, check in monthly with a parole officer. He's done exactly none of that, Derek reported during one of our calls. For 3 years. As far as the state's concerned, Ethan Gallagher is a ghost. He's technically a fugitive, not actively being hunted, but if anyone tips off the right people, he goes straight back to prison. No hearing, no trial, just handcuffs and a cell. How long? Could be another 3-4 years on top of what he already served. Parole violation plus failure to register plus flight from supervision. They'll throw the book at him. I filed that information away for later. I also looked into Victoria's family. The family she'd told me was distant and complicated. The truth was worse. Her parents, Dennis and Margaret Brooks, lived 40 minutes outside Spokane. They hadn't spoken to Victoria in 10 years, not since she'd testified as a character witness for Ethan at his trial. Not since she'd stood up in court and said the man who'd beaten her brother half to death was a good person who made a terrible mistake. Her brother Tyler was 34 years old, permanently disabled, living in a care facility that he would never leave. The traumatic brain injury from Ethan's assault had left him with limited mobility, slurred speech, and cognitive impairments that meant he needed round-the-clock supervision. Victoria had chosen her lover over her own brother, and her family had never forgiven her. I visited Tyler on a Thursday afternoon. The Cascade Ridge Care Facility was a single-story building surrounded by pine trees and that kind of enforced cheerfulness that places like this specialize in. Bright colors, friendly staff, the smell of industrial cleaner barely masked by air fresheners. Tyler was in the common room when I arrived, sitting in a wheelchair by the window. He was thin, pale, with a tremor in his left hand that never quite stopped. But his eyes were sharp. He tracked my approach with obvious curiosity. "Tyler, I'm Shane. I'm married to your sister." He studied me for a long moment, processing. Then, "Vic, Tor, Aya." The name came out slowly, each syllable a separate effort. "Yeah, Victoria." I sat down across from him. "Can we talk?" We talked for 2 hours. Tyler's speech was slow, but his mind wasn't. He understood everything I told him. The basement, the discovery, the 3 years Ethan had been living under my roof while Victoria played devoted wife upstairs. His face cycled through emotions as I spoke. Confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally a kind of devastated acceptance. "She chose him," Tyler said. "Again. I'm sorry. Not your fault." He reached out with his good hand and gripped my arm. "You didn't know. I know now. And I'm going to make this right." "How?" I told him my plan. All of it. The evidence I'd gathered, the lawyer I'd hired, the trap I was setting. Tyler listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there were tears on his face. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet. It's not over." "Doesn't matter." He squeezed my arm harder. "Someone, finally, sees." I stayed until the staff gently suggested that Tyler needed his rest. When I left, I sat in my truck in the parking lot for 20 minutes, just breathing. Then I made a decision. I called Dennis and Margaret Brooks. The conversation was awkward as hell. "Mr. Brooks, my name is Shane Whitfield. I'm married to your daughter." Silence on the other end. Then, carefully, "I wasn't aware Victoria was married. 9 years. She never mentioned me?" "She never mentioned anything. We haven't spoken since the trial." His voice was flat, guarded. "Why are you calling?" I told him. The abbreviated version, enough to convey the situation without getting into every detail. When I finished, there was another long silence. "She's been hiding him," Dennis said finally. "All this time. In your house." "Yes, sir." "And you found out 3 weeks ago. What are you going to do?" I'm going to divorce her, and I'm going to make sure Ethan Gallagher goes back to prison where he belongs." Another pause. When Dennis spoke again, his voice had changed, still guarded, but with something warmer underneath. "Mr. Whitfield, Shane, I think we should meet in person." I met Dennis and Margaret Brooks at their home 2 days later. It was a modest ranch in a subdivision near Tyler's care facility, close enough to visit daily, which they did. Margaret made coffee. Dennis poured whiskey. We sat in their living room surrounded by family photographs that pointedly didn't include Victoria, and they told me the whole story. "She was always his defender," Margaret said, "even before the assault. We'd tell her Ethan had a temper, that we'd seen warning signs. She'd say we were being overprotective, that we didn't understand their relationship. Tyler tried to warn her," Dennis added, "multiple times. He saw Ethan lose his temper once, put his fist through a wall during an argument about something stupid, a sports game or something. Tyler told Victoria she needed to get out. Let me guess, she didn't listen. She told Tyler he was jealous, controlling, that he wanted to ruin her happiness because he'd never had a serious relationship himself." Margaret's voice cracked. That was the last real conversation they had. A week later, Tyler went to Ethan's apartment to confront him, to tell him to stay away from his sister. And Ethan beat him for it. Didn't just beat him. Dennis's hands were shaking. Kept hitting him after he was down, after he was unconscious. The neighbors called 911, but by the time the paramedics got there, he couldn't finish. At the trial, Margaret continued, Victoria testified for the defense, said Ethan was a good person, that Tyler had provoked him, that Tyler had thrown the first punch, which was a lie. He was never violent, not once in his whole life. The jury didn't buy it, thank God. But the fact that she stood up there and said those things about her own brother. We told her to choose, Dennis said. Us or him. Tyler or Ethan. She chose Ethan. We haven't spoken since. We sat in silence for a while. The clock on the wall ticked. Margaret wiped her eyes. What can we do to help? She asked finally. Honestly, I'm not sure yet. But I wanted you to know what's happening. And I wanted to tell you. I hesitated. I've been visiting Tyler. I hope that's okay. Margaret started crying in earnest then. Dennis put his arm around her and looked at me with something that might have been gratitude. He asks about Victoria sometimes, Dennis said. Even after everything. He still loves his sister. I know, he told me. Thank you, Margaret said through her tears. Thank you for telling us. Thank you for caring about Tyler. Thank you for... She couldn't continue. I'll keep you posted, I said. And when this is over, I hope we can stay in touch. We'd like that, Dennis said. We'd like that very much. Week 8. Everything was in place. I had evidence documented from every angle. The photographs, the video surveillance, the financial records, the Costa Rica property paperwork. I had statements from Derek confirming Ethan's identity and parole status. I had Tyler's account of the assault and its aftermath. I had Dennis and Margaret's willingness to testify if necessary. Rachel Torres had prepared the divorce filing, the emergency asset freeze petition, and a detailed brief outlining Victoria's pattern of deception. We were ready. All that remained was the trap. Babe, I've got that conference in Portland next week, I told Victoria over dinner on Sunday night. Monday through Friday. It's the Regional Logistics Summit. I mentioned it last month. Oh, right. She nodded, and I saw the relief flash across her face before she hit it. 5 whole days without needing to sneak around. 5 days of having the house to themselves. That's a long one. Yeah, but it's a good networking opportunity. Plus, the company's paying for the hotel, so might as well take advantage. Of course. She smiled at me, and it was almost convincing. I'll miss you. I'll miss you too. I packed my suitcase on Sunday night, making a show of it, rolling shirts, checking the weather forecast, asking if she'd seen my good belt. All the normal husband going on a work trip behaviors. Monday morning, I kissed her goodbye at the door. Call me tonight, she said. Always do. I drove 2 blocks away and parked behind the old Baptist church. Then I walked back through the neighbor's yard to my surveillance position and settled in to wait. It took less than 2 hours. At 9:47 a.m., Ethan Gallagher emerged from the basement window well. He stretched in the morning sun, casual as you please, then walked right through the back door into my house. Through the kitchen window, I watched him open my refrigerator, pull out a beer, and settle onto my couch like he owned the place. My couch, my television, my house that I'd been paying the mortgage on for 6 years while he lived rent-free underground. Victoria came downstairs a few minutes later. She'd changed out of the robe I'd seen her in at breakfast. Now she wore jeans and a nice blouse, the kind she used to wear when we went on dates. Makeup done. Hair brushed. Looking pretty for her, man. She sat down next to him, curled into his side, and they watched television together in my living room. Like a married couple. I documented everything. 3 hours of footage on my phone. Photographs through every window I could safely reach. At one point, they went upstairs, to my bedroom, I assumed, and I forced myself to keep watching the house, cataloging times, building a record. At 3:45 p.m., I made 2 phone calls. The first was to the U.S. Marshals Fugitive Tip Line. I'd like to report a parole violator, I said. Name's Ethan Gallagher. He's been living unregistered at this address for 3 years. I gave them the details, the address, the window, well entry, the daily patterns I'd observed. He's there right now, with his girlfriend. The officer on the line took my information and promised someone would follow up. The second call was to the process server Rachel Torres had arranged. It's time, I said. The address I gave you, 4 o'clock delivery. On my way. I hung up and waited. At 4:07 p.m., a man in a gray suit knocked on my front door. I was positioned where I could see Victoria's face through the living room window. She answered the door in that nice blouse, probably expecting a package delivery. The server handed her an envelope and said whatever he was supposed to say. Victoria's face went pale. Then white. Then something beyond white. A color that doesn't have a name. The color of someone watching their life collapse. She tore open the envelope right there on the porch. Divorce papers. Emergency petition for asset freeze. Notification of evidence submitted to the court. She started screaming something. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. She ran back inside, and through the window I watched her shouting at Ethan, watched him jump off the couch, watched both of them scramble for phones, for keys, for some kind of escape. At 5:30 p.m., 2 unmarked sedans pulled up in front of my house. U.S. Marshals. 4 officers in tactical vests approached the front door. I watched through my binoculars as they knocked, as Victoria answered looking like she might collapse, as they pushed past her into my home. Ethan ran. Of course he ran. 3 years of paranoia don't just disappear. He bolted out the back door, heading for the basement window. Well, that had been his escape route for so long. But the marshals were faster and smarter, and they'd positioned someone in the backyard. He made it about 20 feet before they had him face down in the grass, hands behind his back, shouting that they had the wrong guy, that this was a mistake, that he hadn't done anything wrong. I watched Victoria collapse on the back porch, sobbing, as the marshals dragged her lover away in handcuffs. Then I walked home. Shane. Victoria spotted me coming up the driveway, and her face cycled through emotions. Shock, guilt, fear, rage, desperation, and finally a kind of wild calculation. "Shane, I can explain." "No," I said. "You can't." One of the marshals approached me. "Sir, are you the homeowner?" "Shane Whitfield. Yes, this is my house. We're going to need a statement and access to the basement area where the fugitive was residing." "Whatever you need. I have photographs and video documentation of the entire space from 8 weeks ago, if that helps." The marshal raised his eyebrows. "That would help considerably." I spent the next 3 hours with federal officers, walking them through everything. The room in the basement, the timeline of discovery, the evidence I'd collected. They were professional, thorough, and very interested in how long Ethan Gallagher had been living under my roof. Victoria sat in the living room the whole time, watched by another officer. She kept trying to make eye contact with me, kept mouthing words I refused to read. When the marshals finally let her speak to me, she grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise. "Shane, you have to listen to me. Ethan and I, it's not what you think. He had nowhere else to go, and I couldn't just abandon him. You abandoned your brother." She flinched. "You chose the man who put Tyler in that facility over your own family, over your parents, over our entire marriage. You've been lying for 10 years, Victoria, every single day." "I loved him. You don't understand what we had, What I understand is that I was convenient. I was a cover story. A paycheck that asked questions you didn't want to answer." I removed her hand from my arm. "My attorney's name is Rachel Torres. Her number's in the paperwork. Don't contact me directly again." "Shane, please." I walked out of my own house and drove to a hotel near the airport. I ordered room service, ate a steak I couldn't taste, and slept better than I had in 2 months. The next 6 weeks were a demolition. The local news picked up the story almost immediately. Fugitive found living in basement for 3 years, made for irresistible television. Victoria's name wasn't released by the authorities, but this was Spokane. People talk. By the end of the first week, everyone who mattered knew. Her employer found out when someone in HR saw the news and recognized the address. Victoria was placed on administrative leave pending investigation into material omissions on her employment application. The investigation took 2 weeks. She was terminated on day 15. Her professional certification was suspended pending review, which everyone knew meant permanent revocation. Her few remaining friends stopped calling. The story had made her radioactive. Dennis and Margaret gave an interview to a local reporter. Margaret cried on camera. Dennis said, "We lost one child to that man. Now we've lost our daughter too." The divorce proceedings were anticlimactic. My evidence was overwhelming. Victoria's attorney tried to claim the marriage had been troubled, that I'd been emotionally distant, that her affair was a symptom of deeper problems. Rachel demolished that argument with Victoria's own text messages, hundreds of loving notes she'd sent me over the years, calling me her best friend, her rock, her everything. She'd been so committed to the cover story that she'd created a paper trail of devotion that now proved her duplicity. The judge granted me the house, my full retirement accounts. No spousal support for Victoria. She walked away with her personal belongings and the money from her hidden accounts, most of which had already gone to her attorney. Ethan went back to prison. 4 years for the parole violations, on top of the time he'd already served. 3 months after I'd found that blue glow in my basement, it was over. Victoria requested a meeting 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized. Closure, her message said. One conversation. I almost said no. Rachel advised against it. I said yes. We met at a coffee shop downtown. Public space, neutral ground. She was already there when I arrived. Thinner, older looking, nursing a cup of tea with both hands. Thanks for coming, she said. I sat across from her. Say what you need to say. She took a breath. Ethan was my first love. We were 22 when we met. Everything was intense, passionate, the kind of love that burns. The kind of love that put your brother in assisted care. That was... She stopped. Tyler said things that night. About Ethan, about our relationship. Things that were cruel and unfair. Tyler tried to protect you. Tyler tried to control me, just like everyone else. Her voice had an edge now. My whole life, people have been telling me what to do, who to love, who to be. Ethan was the first person who just accepted me. He beat your brother into brain damage. He lost his temper. It was wrong, I know it was wrong, but people make mistakes. 7 years in prison isn't a mistake, Victoria. It's a consequence. She had no answer for that. Keep going, I said. You wanted to explain, so explain. When Ethan went to prison, everyone abandoned him. Everyone. I was the only one who kept writing, who kept visiting. And when he got out, he had nothing. No job, no apartment, no money. What was I supposed to do? Let him sleep on the streets? You could have told me. You would have left. Yeah, I would have, because you should have left him years ago. She looked down at her tea. I couldn't. Why not? Because I loved him. She met my eyes. I've always loved him. You were... She caught herself. I was what? You were safe, stable, the opposite of everything Ethan was. She sighed. I thought maybe if I married someone like you, I could have a normal life. I could be normal. And I did love you, Shane. In my way. But not enough. Not enough. She shook her head slowly. I was always going to leave with him. That was always the plan. Costa Rica. Start over. Be together the way we were supposed to be before everything went wrong. So our entire marriage was a holding pattern. Yes. She said it flatly. You were convenient. I'm sorry. I sat with that for a moment. Convenient. 9 years of my life, summarized in a single word. Thank you, I said finally. She blinked. What? Thank you for finally telling the truth. It's the first honest thing you've said in 10 years. I stood up, left a 20 on the table, and walked out. I didn't look back. 6 months later, life had found a new shape. The basement was a gym now. Weights, treadmill, a heavy bag I beat the hell out of 3 mornings a week. I'd filled the window well with concrete myself, spent a whole Saturday mixing and pouring until no trace of it remained. I'd started seeing a therapist. Doc Martinez, twice a week at first, once a week now. Heavy stuff. Trust, betrayal, the difference between being a victim and being a survivor. But necessary. I got promoted at work. My boss said my focus and attention to detail had impressed regional leadership. I didn't mention that my focus came from learning to surveil my own wife. Derek came up from Seattle once a month. Steaks on the grill, beers, whatever game was on. He'd brought someone with him the last 2 visits, a woman named Cassie who worked at his PI firm. Dark hair, sharp smile, the kind of laugh that made you want to hear it again. "Don't get any ideas," he'd said the first time. "She's going through her own divorce." Who said anything about ideas? But she was nice, smart, and she didn't ask too many questions about the concrete patch in my backyard. Tyler sent me letters every couple of weeks. Slow, careful handwriting. His motor control wasn't what it used to be, but consistent. He wrote about his days at the facility, the staff he liked, the birds he watched from his window. He always ended the same way. "Thank you for seeing me." I visited when I could. Brought him books, sat with him, talked about nothing important. His parents came too, often at the same time. Somewhere along the way, they'd started treating me like family. "You're coming to Thanksgiving," Margaret had said last month. Not a question. "Yes, ma'am." Victoria had tried to contact me twice, an email and a voicemail. I deleted both without reading or listening. Some chapters are meant to stay closed. I still thought about her sometimes. Not with anger anymore. That had burned out months ago. Just a kind of distant curiosity, like wondering what had happened to a character in a book you'd finished and set aside. She was in Tacoma now, I'd heard. Working retail. The Costa Rica dream was dead, along with everything else she'd built on lies. I hoped she found some peace. I really did. But I wasn't going to stick around to watch. Last week, Derek asked if I was thinking about dating again. We were on my back porch, beers in hand, watching the sun go down behind the pines. Cassie had gone inside to use the bathroom, and he'd asked the question casually, like it was just making conversation. "Maybe," I said, "when I'm ready." "Any timeline on that?" "No rush." I took a drink. I spent 9 years married to someone I didn't know. Figure I should get to know myself first. Derek nodded. "Fair enough." Cassie came back out, and the conversation moved on. But later that night, after they'd left and I was cleaning up the grill, I thought about the question. Was I ready? Not yet. But I could imagine being ready someday. That was new. That was progress. I locked the back door and turned off the porch light. The basement window well was invisible in the darkness. Just another patch of grass now, no different from the rest. My father had crumbled when my mother betrayed him. He'd stopped eating, stopped working, started drinking. Dead of a heart attack at 52. I was 38. I had decades ahead of me. And I was going to use them. Not to prove Victoria wrong. She didn't matter enough for that. Just to prove myself right. I'd made it through. I was still standing. And whatever came next, I'd handle that too. Some things are worth fighting for. Some things aren't worth a damn. The trick is knowing the difference. I'd learned that lesson the hard way, but I'd learned it. And that was enough.